So as others are arriving, and would really appreciate to hear from you in the chat in terms of where you're from and what you're up to. And I think I'll start, get us kicked off. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Ingmar Gorman. I am a psychologist and co-founder of Fluence with Elizabeth Nielsen. I'm also the CEO of Fluence and a trainer here. And delighted to welcome all of you to one of our monthly webinars. We try to do this every month. These are recorded. You can find the past recordings, which have been really, really exciting, on our website, fluencetraining.com. We did one last month with Jules Evans, which I thought went really, really well. We got a lot of engagement there. And if you want to learn about our training opportunities, again, you can visit our website. We have some excellent opportunities for on-demand education, shorter term live hybrid trainings, as well as even longer term certifications. So we're really excited to be launching more courses today and in the future. The one that I think we're really most excited about is our psychedelic therapy and integration program, which we started last fall. So hopefully you found the chat. If any questions come up for you, we have a Q&A button. That's really the best place to post your questions for our guest today. You can also use the chat, but the questions there tend to kind of disappear as the chat moves on. The Q&A is a really organized way for us to be able to review some of the questions you might have. And the plan for today is to spend about 45 minutes in conversation with our guest, and then at least allowing 15 minutes for some questions to come up, because that's really some of the most exciting opportunities and where there's more spontaneity to come up. So without further ado, I would like to I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Tammy Nelson, who will be speaking to us about the intersection of psychedelics, relationships, and intimacy. Dr. Tammy, if you would be open to this, I would love to have learn a little bit more about your background so the audience can hear. Just sharing a little bit about maybe your bio and maybe starting us off, how did you find yourself here at this intersection of psychedelics, therapy, and intimacy?
Well, thanks, Ingmar. Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for being here. I've been a therapist for over 35 years, which, yes, does date me, but I have been a relationship and a couples therapist first. And what I found was that in all the training that I ever did, all my graduate training, all my postgraduate training, all the letters I had after my name, no one ever talked about sex. And I saw that there was a couple of sex therapists that are on. So yeah, welcome. So glad you're here. And maybe I will convert some of you to get more sex therapy training after today. So I really pursued the integration of sexuality and relationships. I really feel like all of us should be trained in sex and couples therapy and relationship therapy. If you're talking about people's relationships, you should be really comfortable talking about sex, unless you're working with people that are really, truly just roommates. And then if that's the case, you're working with people who individually have narratives about their own sexuality, either from their past or their present, their future, their history. I mean, we're all sexual people. And so I really made it my mission to train therapists and to integrate relationship and sex therapy. And I started the Integrative Sex Therapy Institute. And I found, through psychedelic therapy as well, the idea of integration at like a whole nother level. It's sort of a more intense matrix of how to integrate the experience of people's narrative, how they really live relationship, the relationship to a greater experience of their own identity. So I'm fascinated with how we are intimate with ourselves. Like, it's interesting how people talk about sex as intimacy, intimacy as into me see, like how I see into myself is the only way that I can really connect to the narrative they have about the world. So that's a short introduction to how I got here, maybe, and how I'm still here and still discovering parts of myself and what I want to pursue.
Yeah. Yeah. So, right, it's a really interesting intersection because one reason why we founded Fluence and do these trainings is because we found that psychedelics were often a topic that therapists weren't prepared to talk about, or maybe even clients weren't ready to speak of, and trying to change that in a way where it can become a more well, that could be brought into the therapeutic relationship. It can be discussed, and not only could there be harm reduction, but in fact some benefit maximization, or just a decrease of stigma around that. And that the same can be said about sex. And so I'm curious, when you just spoke to this a little bit, but when you bring in psychedelics into this conversation as it relates to sex or intimacy, what are the kinds of questions or kinds of topics that clients bring up?
Mm-hmm.
What do
Mm-hmm.
you, what do you encounter at this crossroad?
Well, I was really interested in pursuing this because my own history with psychedelics, I grew up in the 70s, so, we did everything, and it was not a safe setting, and um, the mindset was a little bit different. So I did like a 20-year cleanse of my psyche and didn't do drugs or alcohol, or I didn't eat meat. I was really, I sort of had this detox. And then when I was ready to retox, I wanted to do it in a way that applied relationally. Because what I found back then is that the experiences I had made me feel really isolated and alone. And that was the thing that made me feel really anxious, and made me confront my own disconnection from my family, and my own trauma was about being neglected and disconnected. And so when I was ready as an adult, and after I'd done all this training, which obviously I did to like fix myself because I'm a therapist and that's what we do, I realized that the whole purpose of my life was to learn about connection. And when I did my training, I did it first with MAPS, the MDMA training, and then I did the Polaris ketamine training. And I did Jane Gumpel, who's here, shout out to her, her Cultivating Joy with couples retreat with my husband. And then we assisted in that retreat, and now we're doing those retreats. There is something about expanding the experience of connection to such a level that people can explore the trauma of disconnection in a different way, in a different language. So when I first started doing this with couples, the first thing that always comes up is some kind of trauma. And it's not necessarily sexual trauma. It's not necessarily historical or generational trauma, but it could be. And the experience is always about some kind of reintegration, so reconnection. And so the capacity that we have as humans is so much greater than I ever experienced. And I'm sure all of you have had this experience too. But the thing that comes up for people as they sort of expand their narrative around disconnection is, oh, I'm connected, number one, to everything. Number two, I can be reconnected to my partner or partners or past partner or future partner in a whole new way. And number three, I'm connected to myself and who I am, in almost like I've been shaken up and reintegrated into my identity. So those three things are dramatically shifted. in a way that just saves a lot of time, money, and heartache for people that are in therapy. It sort of like speeds up the process, as I'm sure you've all experienced as well.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's really helpful. I'd never heard that pun before, intimacy. And I think one of the themes that you've brought up in some of your writing and is coming up here again is kind of this idea of um, moving beyond just a uh, individual kind of internal experience, and understanding, as we've known in psychotherapy for a long time, that relationships are a key factor, but also bringing that into the world of psychedelics. I think that when somebody imagines a maybe a prototypical psychedelic treatment, they're thinking about somebody who is on ketamine or psilocybin, and they're having this internal inward experience. And then there's a discussion of, well, what's the role of the therapist, and the relationship that exists there. But this is almost taking it to, well, I guess, is sort of the edge of my understanding, because although there's implications for relationships in that kind of singular individual focused therapy, you don't necessarily have the other member of the couple or the significant other on the psychedelic with them, or even if they're not on a psychedelic, in the room. So I guess one question that I have, or I'm curious about, is, what do you see when you have a closer involvement, or potentially even direct involvement of, well, I guess the couple is the patient or client in a way, but I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that transition from sort of the individual to working with a pair?
So it's interesting because if we think about the goal of, let's say, ketamine assisted psychotherapy, it really is always relational psychotherapy, right? So whether it's an interpersonal journey, or all of psychedelic therapy, all of ketamine therapy, I think is it's sort of singular, right? Like, it's this experience of going inside to your own psyche and having your own experience, and then trying to translate it for another person. That experience of translation is a new way of communicating and trying to connect. So the goal is always like relating, like, how am I going to explain this? How am I going to welcome someone into this new experience that I've had? It's not so much, I want you to come into this with me because this is my psyche. I don't know if you could ever really 100% experience it, but I want to have a way to connect on the bridge between our psyches in a way that I've never really had before. So I'm sharing with you these insights and this vision and these colors, whatever I'm trying to communicate. And that in and of itself changes our relationship. So the one thing that I think is incredibly beneficial and probably will change the way that we do couples therapy is that when a couple walks into the room, immediately it's a setup for triangulation, right? There's the victim, the perpetrator, and the rescuer. And we almost can't avoid it. Like, there's the good guy, the bad guy, and we're going to be the rescuer. And that's a trauma triangle, right? So we are recapitulating some kind of trauma there from the get-go. We can't help it. And couples come in when it's A, too late, B, they're just dropping somebody off on their way out the door, or C, they have one foot out the door anyway, and they're just checking off the box. And here, people are focused on the internal work that takes away that triangulation, because I'm not the rescuer. Like, they have now this internal wisdom, and that changes everything. Like, that changes everything. I feel so relieved to be doing this work because it's so much easier. I don't have to be this privileged person that has all the answers and figuring out what's best for their relationship. Now they can decide through their own inner journey and inner wisdom what the best thing is for how to connect on that bridge, and how are we going to learn to communicate differently, and to reimagine the narrative of their relationship. My job really is to help them talk about and communicate that so that they integrate the differences long term. I think our challenge is, how do you make those changes stick? So to just simplify the answer that you were looking for, like, can we really do this with couples if it's such an internal experience? I think it's incredibly powerful with couples, whether both are doing the journey at the same time, whether they're doing a psycholytic dose or a psychedelic dose. The object really is to bring back that information or that change or that narrative and learn how to communicate in a different way. I think it's going to change everything, actually.
That's just a fabulous answer. I mean, I'll say I'd never thought about it in that way. Definitely, the inner healer or the intuition, or however we want to refer to that process, where a person is coming to their own understanding, insights, and emotional expression, whatever it may be, transpersonal experience. There's something about that where a person can access that within themselves with a supportive therapist, but that it's really that almost nothing is truly intrapsychic, but just to this degree, it's more intrapsychic. And then to reiterate what you said, which is, okay, well, what if we bring two people who are having that process, and your role as a therapist shifts, and changing that dynamic of needing to be a rescuer, or even to some degree a facilitator of that communication. I'm sure there's some of that, but there's much more almost power in the couple to be able to build that bridge. And what I'm also hearing is that it's not about one person accessing the psychedelic experience of the other. It's in sort of the sharing of the experience, the narrative that sometimes emerges from that, and then that experience of the shared narrative is what impacts the relationship. Do I have that right?
Yes. And it's also understanding that we can never access the other person's psyche. Like, we are so different. Like, wow, you have a totally different experience in there, and I can never get in there. And that in and of itself is really powerful for couples. Like, that we each have, I'll give you an example. So, of a ketamine journey that my husband and I had, I came back with like these deep insights into what the meaning of my mothering was like what my mother did to me, what I did as a mother, my impact in the world, and the generations of women that have come before me, and all the trauma that has been passed down that I'm working to heal. And I came back like all empowered, and I was like, what was your experience? And he was like, well, the cushions on the couch were moving like amazingly. And I was like, that's it? That's all you got? Like that, the difference of appreciating the sort of present experience that he was having, and the incredible transgenerational experience that I was having, instead of being upset with each other or arguing about it. It was actually hysterical, and we could appreciate each other's differences. And I think also the piece there that's important, that when we talk about how this works sexually or intimately, is that it's more about pleasure than it is about sexual dysfunction. So it's not that we go in and go, okay, what's not working in your relationship, or what are you not getting enough of that is pathological or dysfunctional or diagnostic that we now have to fix with whatever psychedelic journey we're going to do. It's more about how are we avoiding or denying or rejecting pleasure, and how can we expand on what is pleasurable in your relationship and add more in there. And if he finds the couch cushions pleasurable, then you know what, maybe we need to do more focus on things that look nice and cool. And if what I find pleasurable is having a mission in the world, then he can support me in that. Like, there is a difference between healing trauma through digging into the pain, and healing trauma through healing through pleasure. And there's a neurological function of overriding trauma with pleasure, not necessarily by reinforcing the pain. And that's something that you can do with psychedelic therapy too, with an intense amount of accuracy.
Yeah, yeah, well said. I find that I often present an option to my clients uh, after a period of time. There could be an option like, do we want to continue to explore the aspects of the past, or how much do we want to maybe focus on sort of the future, the near future, or what actions would you like to take, or what could be different. And I think that's a helpful orientation because sometimes clients, there's a culture around psychotherapy that it has to be a constant excavation of the past. And that's not necessarily the case, although it can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm curious, when I think about practicing psychedelic integration or psychedelic therapy, at the very beginning, I'm thinking about preparation and also a little bit of um, assessment.
Mm-hmm.
So if for like a classic case, it might be, okay, if somebody has PTSD, are they currently in a highly traumatic environment?
Mm-hmm.
Is this a good time for a person to undergo a therapeutic process where there could be a lot of opening if they're continually exposed to sort of the trauma? And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm thinking about a corollary, if there would be one, or how would you handle a situation not so, let's say, harmful per se in that way, but where, what if a couple comes to you and says they're basically, we've seen two couples therapists already. It wasn't helpful. We feel like we're on the verge of like breaking up or getting divorced. Um, you know, can the ketamine work be helpful for us? There's still like somewhere a seed of them wanting to get like work it out. It's not like they've completely given up, but it's sort of the case that you described, right? That people often seek out couples work when it's, I don't want to say too late, but it's sort of things are quite bad. So I'm curious, like, how would you respond to that scenario? Would you say, well, I wouldn't put words in your mouth. I'm curious, like, how would you approach that where it's sort of a little bit more of a challenging situation?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a couple thoughts about that. One is, I think as couples therapists, we've been trained that the only positive treatment outcome is for couples to stay together. And if that's our positive treatment outcome focus, we're going to fail about 50% of the time, regardless of what we do. So, knowing that that it has nothing to do with us, it's just marriage sometimes has an expiration date. And just by its nature, people aren't going to stay together. That perhaps one way we can be helpful is to help people have a very intentional separation, and to do it really consciously sometimes takes really in-depth therapy. And that can happen in ketamine therapy or psychedelic therapy, and sometimes in a retreat format, like with other couples. And because there's a grief process that happens with all couples work. So, you first come in with a narrative, whatever that is, and then there's the second part of the therapy is grief. It's letting go of the story that you thought you had about your relationship. I thought we were going to rock on the front porch forever. I thought I was going to be sexy for the rest of my life. I thought you were going to always be attracted to me. I thought we were always going to have this kind of sex. I thought, we were going to have kids. I thought, whatever it is, we have to grieve it and really let it go before we can go through the third phase, which is the vision. Like, what is it going to be now? What can we create going forward? What can we reboot? And, where's the hope of like what we can practice now? Until you sort of grieve that, you really can't move forward. And I really think part of this is it's not all roses and unicorns and rainbows. It's like, oh my God, we really are in pain, and we have to let go of this story in order to go to the next place. So I wouldn't reject everyone that's in intense pain. I would see them as like in the process of going to the next developmental level of their relationship. Maybe that's just co-parenting. Maybe that's just being friends. Maybe that's, drawing a line in the sand and saying, this relationship, this monogamy agreement's over, but we can start a new one together. But it can't be based on that monogamy agreement. That didn't work. That sucked. And I think assessing for the capacity for the resources that people have in order to sort of ride that train, like to be triggered by that amount of grief, number one, and number two, to know that the partner isn't going to necessarily be able to hold them through that there's an internal individual experience that you're going to have to go through. And number three, how are you going to support each other through that process? So to go back to what I was saying before, to also reinforce for them, like, I'm not going to save you from this experience. Like, the therapist is not going to rescue you. If you want to go through this, you have to go through this as a couple and by yourself. And the last thing I just want to say about that too is, I think we are still working on, and I know Fluence is great at this, Jane Gumpel's good at this. We have to help people also understand that there's a somatic component to this. Like, a lot of stuff is going to happen in your body that's going to give you information about healing, but sometimes we ignore it. Like, we've been taught, especially for women, we've been taught to cut off any sensation below our neck and not recognize what is going on down there. If we're hungry, we want salad. If we are turned on by someone, and we must have a crush on them. Like, like, we are kind of confused about what's going on below our neck. So in a psychedelic experience, a lot of information can come up, and it can be really flooding, actually, because we store so much somatically. So I would also assess in a couple how in touch they are with illness, history of injury, how they take care of themselves physically, what actually happens. I'll just tell you one quick story. I've had an experience myself, this awareness of this inner healer part of me, that I was having a lot of abdominal problems, like infections and ovarian cysts and surgery, all kinds of stuff going on. And I had an experience where this higher part of me was saying, you got to work through your mother stuff. Like, seriously, that's part of you that parented, the part of you that step-parented, the part of you that felt abandoned by your mother. If you don't work through this, this is going to be life-threatening. And I came out of that and I was like, wow, like, oh my God, I 100% knew that my body had told me, the higher self had told me, the healing that I needed to do had nothing to do with surgery. It was like a psych surgery that needed to happen. And it was like the work that I needed to do for the next couple of years. And it was 100% true. And that's also your sexual chakra too, where all the pleasure and creativity is. And, I really think that part of our integration work is to help people process what's coming up in their bodies. And that's a great way to integrate sex therapy and relationship therapy after a journey with people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely want us to have some more time to talk about sex therapy, but you mentioned something in passing that I wanted to dig into this a little bit more, because you're also organizing retreats for couples.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned in passing that a couples retreat can be particularly helpful. So I'm curious, how does, when you add that variable of doing this work with other couples as part of the group, how is that helpful, or what changes?
I think there's probably a lot of people here, including Jane and other people, that have done couples retreats or workshops. There's something, even if you just do group work, like, there's something very powerful about having the container. I also think that we, as a culture coming out of the pandemic, I think one of the major takeaways is that we have realize that relationship is the most important thing. It's not toilet paper, right? It's like, we really have to find our pod of people that we feel safe with. We really need to outsource our needs to other people. We really need to decide how to reconnect. Like, loneliness, as we know, is, the mental illness explosion around the globe. And so our job as therapists is to help people to reconnect, help people to find relationship skills, help people to create those relationships that they so desperately need. And so being in a retreat or a group is reminding people, it's reintegrating, it's remembering those split off parts of ourselves that that we may have denied or are dismembered when it comes to connecting. It's remembering how to be in a village, how to be part of a tribe, how to be part of a membership with other people. And when you're in that group with a partner, it's kind of like if you're looking for friends or looking for an affair partner or looking to be in an open relationship, we don't look for another person, we look to be another person. So when you're in a group, you see a part of you reflected in each of those people. And if you're in a group with couples, you see a part of your relationship reflected and affected by each of those other couples. And when they're coming out of a psychedelic journey, it's even more intense. So each of those couples is speaking for you. And so for instance, like you mentioned before, if you're in a relationship that is at a turning point, you might see the tools that you need or the language that you're looking for, or you might remember why you got together in the first place, which you can't necessarily get in, that triangle of one therapist and a couple. I think it just emphasizes that support that is out there potentially for you as a couple. It helps you remember why relationship is so important. You may stay together, you may break up, but the point is you remember that you're not alone.
I see that Jane says in the chat that the group becomes the medicine.
It's so powerful. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, coming back to sex therapy, well, I think some therapists may be wary of sexual experiences that can arise in the psychedelic experience or relate to psychedelics. Mm-hmm. So, for the non-sex therapists who are here, I guess one question is, how would you advise that they maybe integrate this into their practice, kind of having conversations about sex and psychedelics? And that's a big question, but you can take that from wherever you want.
It's a big question. I think our whole field is sort of grappling with this, right? Because we're talking about experiences that really have no boundaries. You're like, here, take this medicine. You're going to have a boundaryless experience and see on the other side. And by the way, do you want to be touched during it? Like that is like a mind-blowing new, really challenging time in therapy, where it's bringing up a lot of challenges for therapists. It's bringing up ethical challenges for our field. And that's just between the therapist and the client. So now we're talking about how do you bridge, touch and affection and attention and the topic of sex into this area, because what we're trying to do is make this safe for people to do, because it's scary. Let's be honest, it's scary as hell. So the first time I came out of ketamine, I'm like, wait, we're giving this to patients? Are we really doing this? It can be scary. And so the idea of creating this safe space for people so that they can have this very intense, challenging at times experience means that we're trying to split off things that could be illicit or forbidden or naughty, which, to be honest, is the whole definition of eroticism, right? So just like having a family, we create family and we want it to be safe. So we create safety for our family and we split off eroticism outside of family. We don't want to have mixed sex and kids and family, and which is why over long-term relationships, instead of getting more erotic, they get less erotic. And so it's kind of the same thing in psychedelic therapy. The more we want it to be safe, the more we split off the erotic outside of the relationship to guarantee people's safety. But the reality of relationship, particularly romantic relationships, is that they are erotic. There's the companionship, which is what we do for kids and how we watch Netflix together and how we hang out. the roommate part of the relationship, but the whole other part of the relationship is the erotic part. And that's where the passion and the aliveness and the in love part lives. So you can't really say, just bring this part to the experience, don't bring that part, because we're scared as therapists. We can't handle that. That's threatening to us. So we're actually colluding with people to discount or deny or hide or not work on that part of the relationship by us saying we can't handle that. That's not okay. Now, that being said, we have to have a way to set up really clear boundaries with them that we are not in that erotic part of the relationship. Part of the way we could do that is by honoring it, putting it out there, and saying, we are honoring the aliveness in this room, in this situation, and honoring the joy and the pleasure and the intimacy, but being very, very clear about touch. And if you're doing these journeys with people and couples, to be really clear with them about what you're comfortable in the room with. You can hold hands, you can snuggle with each other, but you have to keep your clothes on. You have to be really clear to express the purpose of the session. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's a really helpful, concrete like frame to have, or boundary to have, in terms of how you work. That does make a lot of sense. I'm reminded of a case just where an individual in treatment with a psychedelic was a lot of her work was related to, or it was about trauma, and a lot of different very intense traumas. Not really sexual in nature, but over the course of her treatments or dosing sessions, there was a session where she really embraced her sexuality in a very active way. She kept her clothes on, but to say that, there was, for a pretty prolonged period, she was very enthusiastically, very in the emotion of speaking about both, kind of in detail about how she thought that she, the things that she was good at sex, things she didn't like from her sexual partners. And it was, I think, very valuable for her to, in a therapeutic context with therapists, to be able to openly really go into those feelings, and really be in touch with embracing really herself in that way, like how the pride that she had about how great at sex she was, and also being able to clearly state, what is it that she doesn't like. And I could see how that would be so important to welcome in these sessions, but also how unexpected it can be. You spoke about the boundaries that get kind of brought down with psychedelics. That was not on the agenda, so to speak. Not to say that it's not welcome, but I could see how a clinician could be caught off guard. Oh, okay, this is where we're going. And it's not like, I think it would be inappropriate to sort of say, well, that's not something that we should be talking about right now, right? Because the shutting down of this thing that is so emergent and clearly important to this person. And it maybe even ties back to what we said earlier about the embrace of the positive, and not just kind of focusing on the negative or the past. I know that's sort of a reflection that came up for me.
And how powerful that they could share this exploration of their narrative, of their identity, and practice saying it out loud so that they could wonder, am I going to get shamed for this? Am I going to feel guilty? Like, what is this going to be like to integrate these parts of me in sort of a public place? And for the therapist, I mean, the challenges are obvious. If it's something that's happening that is going to actually turn you on or be uncomfortable for you, like, how do you manage your own countertransference in those moments? I mean, I've had more than one woman make love to the universe during her session with her clothes on, but quite obviously. And by the way, just as a side note, that's sort of interesting that that's happening to a lot of women right now culturally, that they're all having that experience. Very powerful. But the implication is that we as therapists really need to learn to take care of our biases and our own countertransference around sexuality. Like, what is happening for us? What is the lens that we're looking at around sex? Why can't we talk about it? Why can't we ask people, when was the last time you had sex and how was it? Like, why aren't we bringing it up in the first session? Why isn't it in the room? And how also can we avoid the misinterpretation of those experiences so that people aren't coming out saying, I didn't plan on talking about my sexual trauma. You made me do it. And because I can understand that therapists are afraid of those things and afraid of those, legal issues and the things that might be uncomfortable. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, I completely agree. That it's that unpredictability. And I think as a psychedelic therapist, one is ready for intense expression of affect, which can include sexual affect, if you will, or erotic affect. But yeah, I think really being clear when I think about the way that we approach psychedelic integration, that sense of the therapist's role as somebody who creates that safe container, to use that the commonly used phrase, but also a clear understanding around boundaries and the therapist's role, because it can be quite right. The client is in this sort of boundary dissolved state, and really sort of I think things can go sideways when the clinician gets their boundaries become blurred and get caught up in that. And yeah, it's a whole new kind of horizon almost here.
Oh, 100%. It's like the Wild West right now, which is why we need like people like you and your institute, my institute, Jane Gumpel's institute, like, Polaris. Like, we really need a lot of training and a lot of therapists to go through their own journeys in order to process this stuff, because there's a lot of stuff coming up, and it's I think it's really time sensitive. Like, we need to do it fast. There feels like an urgency. I don't know if you feel that way too. There feels like an urgency, like, get this done.
Yeah, I mean, I think many of us see the potential that psychedelic therapy has, and we're following the evidence and doing the research, and then these are tightly controlled studies with a lot of oversight. And what happens when this hits a less controlled environment? I think we just have to do the best that we can and all we can to prepare. And I think we're not going to catch everything. We're not going to be able to address everything, unfortunately, because it is coming up soon.
Yeah.
I want to move over to the Q&A. We've got quite a few questions here. I think we spoke to this one, but I'm going to maybe just restate it just to make sure there's nothing else to add. So considering the ethical nuance to facilitating a couples therapy psychedelic experience that's open to eroticism, sex, and touch, what differences do you see in the way we train psychedelic couples therapists compared to psychedelic therapists doing work with individuals? So I think one thing we hit on was, I really liked how you set that frame, like clothes will remain on. That's a very concrete thing. But do other things come to mind around kind of this?
I think you really need couples therapy training if you're going to work with couples, like to to have the skills for people to communicate with each other, so that you're not doing individual therapy with each person in the room. Like, you're really knowing how to help them communicate with each other, to validate and empathize, and to have dialogue skills that they can use after the session. So and I would integrate, sex coaching or sexuality counseling or sex therapy in that as well. I mean, I think you need to do some kind of sex therapy in individual work too, but um, I'm just going to reiterate, like couples therapy, I think is the hardest thing out of all the therapy that I've been trained in. It is hard. So I'm acknowledging and empathizing and encouraging people to get training in that.
I think that's a good answer. If I have any weight here on this. So this has come up in the Q&A in different ways, but we haven't really talked about different kinds of molecules. And maybe I should, give the preface that we really don't have in clinical trial work with psychedelics. Actually, there's a study with MDMA in couples or significant others in PTSD treatment. But it's suffice to say that it's fairly limited.
Mm-hmm.
That as a caveat, a question coming up is, would there be a reason to maybe choose psilocybin or MDMA or ketamine or I don't know, 2CB or another compound over another? Just maybe kind of your opinion in terms of couples work.
I mean, I can't wait till MDMA is legal because I think as an empathogen, it's like a heart opener. It connects people in a way that the other psychedelics don't because it's more internal. So I think that is going to be an incredibly powerful tool for couples. It's a much longer experience. I don't know how cost effective it's going to be for all of us to do, but I think it's been my own therapy and my own relationship, and I think it will be a really powerful tool for couples who have conflict to sort of rewrite their narrative. I'm not sure about psilocybin. I don't know if I have an opinion about it yet. I would turn that question over to the experts. And right now, we're doing ketamine retreats, and I'm really hopeful about the benefits of those.
Yeah, I mean, I just know historically, and it's, this is an N of one or maybe a couple dozen, but Sasha Shulgin really was a big fan of MDMA and 2CB, particularly, I believe, in a sexual context. So I think if people are interested in reading more about that, I can't remember if it's like TCAL or PCAL, but he writes in, well, probably PCAL. He writes about his relationship with his wife and their experiences. This is a short one, but I think we talked about training. So I like this question. Is there a PhD? This is a particularly focused question, but I like it. Is there a PhD focused in sexology and psychedelics at this point? Anna, who has a Master of Science in sexology, is wondering. So I guess maybe more broadly, like, do you know, like, are there academic opportunities that cover this intersection?
It's a great idea, though. I teach at a lot of programs, and I'm the director of a PhD program. I think there's probably a lot of tracks. There's a psychedelic tracks, there's sex therapy tracks. The marriage of the two of them, I don't think has happened yet, but maybe we could create that. I know there's a lot of new research coming out, like Susan McBride and Mark Cornfield just released a paper on ketamine in couples. They've been doing groups in Canada for a long time. So I think, academically, it's coming. It's just not necessarily here yet, but there are rumblings.
Great, thank you. So I know there's questions in the chat. I'm gonna get to those after the Q&A just because harder to find there. So I thought this was a good question. It kind of speaks back to one of the questions that I had, which was, are there clients that you would say that would not benefit from psychedelics, and why? And of course, to take a piece of that, right? Like, we can identify contraindications that are psychiatric or medical, but kind of like keeping it in the context of the work of couples, intimacy, sex. Like, are there clients that, or particular issues or circumstances under which you would do you think they might not benefit from psychedelics?
I think, I mean, all the regular screening issues, you know, psychotic symptoms, severe anxiety or severe depression. But I think as far as relational issues, any compulsive, out of control sexual behavior or infidelity, that seems to be such a hot topic that there is unresolved rage in the relationship, or and I hate to use this sort of personality disorder as an indicator, but when there's intense narcissism in the relationship where one person doesn't take any responsibility for what seems to be happening, I think that kind of shows up in retreats and just brings out rage and instability. So, I would assess for sort of, they don't have to be totally stable, but they do have to have the capacity for finding their own resources in the relationship. And if they're just coming to find, there are people that come to find an audience for their drama. And so you have to sort of assess that. And I would just recommend having an individual session or two with people if you're not sure before you put them in a group, or having a screening session on the phone before you let them into your office.
I think that's a really astute observation. This is a question that comes up in the chat. And I'm just going to read it as it's stated because I could add more to it, but I won't. So, curious about risks of affair development following a psychedelic couples retreat.
Interesting. Well, I mean, there's risks of affair development anywhere, right? And any situation, people can, feel connected to each other. You could meet someone in the grocery store. I mean, I work with open relationships. I wrote Open Monogamy, a guide to co-creating your ideal relationship agreement. So I get people in all relationship structures. And, one of the questions people always ask is, well, if you open your relationship, can't your partner fall in love with someone? And I'm not laughing as to shame anyone. I'm just saying, you can always fall in love with someone. You could always have an affair. It doesn't matter if you're in a psychedelic workshop or if you're in an open relationship, or I think you do get connected to people in those workshops at a very deep level. I don't think it's an indicator of whether or not you're going to cheat on your partner. I think there's a lot of other indicators.
Thank you. I really appreciate you fielding these questions. We still have about 5 more minutes. There's a question that I came up here, and I really love the level of engagement that we're getting from our audience. This kind of, in my mind, points a little bit towards integration. So somebody asks, until psychedelic therapy for couples is legal, which insights from psychedelic work are most useful for personal and therapeutic work on relationships and sex in regular states of consciousness? I just say I really love that question as well. So maybe to phrase it differently, like, how might we bridge what is unique or learned or special about psychedelic therapy in couples into non-psychedelic life?
I mean, for me as a therapist, I can say that the biggest takeaway so far has been that we all have the answers. Like, we all have that inner healer, regardless of the question. That we all do have the Dr. Google inside. And no matter what the question, no matter what the situation, I keep coming back to that. And that has proven incredibly impactful in my own relationships and my health, my life. I think that's the greatest takeaway for me personally. I don't know how other people have integrated those experiences with being a psychedelic therapist. You might answer differently, Ingmar. I mean, it's a great question.
Well, I definitely, I think that your answer is the one that stands out the most for me, because it's the experience of witnessing, being in a psychedelic session, and we are, as therapists, so equipped and ready to be active. And then and sometimes we are, right? But what's most surprising is when you encounter that psychedelic session where you really are just almost observing, and
Mhm.
allowing that the wisdom or the person to um, to find the healing process on their own. And if they're speaking aloud to it, to being in touch with my own experience of just amazement at wow, like wow, I would never have thought of that, or this is incredible what I'm hearing this person say as it pertains to the things that they've struggled with. And then also the recognition that doesn't end when the drug effect is over. Like that's to me is and that maybe speaks to also the integration process, just being in an astonishment that can continue. And you know, doing private practice integration work, it's not a one and done often. Actually, more often what I find is there's sort of a progressive process after multiple experiences with psychedelics. But then there becomes, I find that a point comes where there's almost like again, it's not a switch like on off, but
Mhm.
it goes from a less of a reliance on the psychedelic experiences and more on, well, integration, like of I don't know if integration is ever complete, but they are integrated to the point at which they can now go and do this on their own, even without my support or without therapy. So we have like a minute left. I want to just give before we wrap up, you an opportunity, Dr. Tammy, to just speak to some where people can find you, some of the events that you might have upcoming, just so that those who are interested could be involved.
Yes, and I want to offer all of the listeners on this um, course or in this call, doing this Cultivating Joy retreat in Oregon this September. And I do these retreats, a couple times a year for ketamine in couples. I put the link in the chat. You can find more at my website, drtammynelson.com. But if you tell me that you heard me here, we'll give any clinicians that sign up a free 90-minute sort of integration call afterwards to sort of review how we do retreats and give you some insight into maybe how you might do some of this work. I'll also, be happy to offer you any information, answer any questions that you might have. I would also check out Jane Gumpel's Cultivating Joy retreats and trainings. She's at Menla in New York. We can put that link in there too. And my institute is the Integrative Sex Therapy Institute. And if you're interested in more courses or you want to be certified as a sex and couples therapist, I'd love to send you that information and happy to send you free courses to get you started. My mission is to really make sure everyone can be comfortable talking to their clients about sex and intimacy. And I'd love to see you guys at the retreat. I'm really excited to have you. And thank you so much, Ingmar, for inviting me here today.
Yeah, thank you. This was a really, I found this to be an incredibly fun conversation. I hope that we could continue it again another time for part two. I'll just share about some of the upcoming things for Fluence before we wrap up. One, next month, our webinar is going to be about the inner healing intelligence, which has been a debated topic of late. We'll have somebody on who's somewhat critical of that concept. So that's going to be really exciting. Again, free webinar next month. We'll have some info going out about that soon. And if you haven't taken our psychedelic therapy and integration certificate, please do so. And we also have a CAP module coming up with Chantal, who is just an incredible trainer, therapist, MDMA therapist, ketamine therapist. So again, please visit our website to learn more. And again, thank you all for attending. Tammy, again, thank you so much for your time, and really look forward to a part two in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody.
All right, take care, everyone.